Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio, and I'm really excited today because I've got together the layout and the top for the stars quilt, for the children's quilt that we've been doing with the different star blocks. So I just wanted to show you this, and as you can see I've just got sort of two borders on at the moment, but I'll come and talk about borders a little bit later. But I just wanted to point out some key things on the whole quilt. So we ended up with lots of different star blocks, and I'll go through all the numbers with you in more detail in a little bit as well. And I did manage to get my 12-inch star block in the centre down there. But each row consists of one 8-inch block and then 3 of the 6-inch blocks until we get to the bottom row, because we had to do something a little bit different with the 12-inch. But if we just have a quick look at the quilt, you can see here, so in each row, I've put the 8-inch star blocks somewhere slightly different, and then I've used 2.5-inch squares to sort of space everything out and to make everything the same size so it all comes together really nicely. So let's have a look at all of this in a little bit more detail. Now I've made a total of 6 of the 8-inch stars, and I did 3 of the Lemoyne and 3 of the Sawtooth stars. And then we did 5 of the Friendship stars, so these were the 6-inch blocks. I did 4 of the 8-pointed or spiky star, as I call it, and then we did another 5 of the Ohio stars, and then there was one 12-inch Lemoyne, which I've put in the bottom right-hand corner there. So that's the sort of total number of stars. So each row, as I said, has got one 8-inch and 3 6-inch stars until we come to the 2 bottom rows. But I'll talk about that because we needed to fit in that 12-inch star into that space, because that's where I decided to put that particular big block. So the first thing we need to do with this is actually turn all of our 6-inch stars into 8-inch blocks so that we're working with the same size blocks as our 8-inch stars. And I simply did that by adding 2.5-inch squares along the left-hand side and along the bottom of all of the 6-inch stars, with the exception of one star, which is right at the bottom here, which the actual 2.5-inch squares were along the top and to the right, and that was just sort of a design layout choice. But all of the other star blocks, the 2.5-inch squares, were added sort of like in an L shape, if you like, around those, because then I was working with all 8-inch blocks. Okay, so there was a total of 14 6-inch blocks I used in the quilt. So this was our 6-inch block, which we need to make to 8-inch so that it fits better with the other 8-inch star blocks that we've done. So I've pre-sewn those. I've just put a row of 4 squares down one side, and we're just going to attach these 3 together and add that to the block and put the whole thing together. So 13 of the blocks, the squares go on in an L shape like that, but one of the block, which goes down in the very bottom corner, we actually put the squares along the top and along the right-hand side. Now, that's only important if you've got a directional fabric. If yours is a multi-directional fabric like this one will be a little bit, you can just turn the block to make that fit, if that makes it easier. But I say if you've got one with a direction, you will just need to bear that in mind. So we're going to put those 3 together, and we're going to attach that to the block, and then we'll attach that side piece. Now I've just had a look at where the seams go on this block, and in both of these they go towards these outside squares. So on this 3-piece I've pressed the seams towards that centre square, and then all this should nest when we come to do this row. So there's our 6-inch star block turned into an 8-inch block. So we're just going to take that to the iron and give it a press. And there it is. We've turned our 6-inch star into an 8-inch block. And then it was assembled by row. I did it row by row. So let's have a look at our first row, and that is everything that sort of goes up into above that line right there. So I've got my 8-inch block to start with in the corner, and then I put my 6-inch blocks next to it, but you can see I've actually just dropped that down one because when I was looking at my row 2, I didn't want any star block directly touching any of the others. So I put in what I call my spacer blocks. So I've put a row of spacers in there underneath this 8-inch, and then my 6-inch stars, which are now 8-inch blocks, I've lined up with the bottom here. So they've gone in there. And then because I've added a spacer block there, I needed to put spacer squares along the top here so that that row all came out the same height, which would have been 10.5 inches, so 10-inch finished. And that's row 1. Okay, so row 2, that's just got our blocks as normal, and the only thing I've added here is a spacer bar here so that this 8-inch star block wasn't directly touching our friendship star here. So that's the only additional bit that I actually added to this row once we turned these into 8-inch blocks. So that is row 2. So that's a fairly straightforward one with just one set of spacer blocks there. Row 3, I'm going to start from this way and sort of work across. Now I added spacers here. So this is our 6-inch star with our L-shaped squares added to make it to 8 inches here, here and here. But then I put my 8-inch star block there, and I needed to add a spacer in there to separate it out from this star block. And I think I put a spacer underneath. Yes, I did. I put a spacer underneath, so I was just checking. I will just refer to that because don't worry, if this seems a little bit complicated, I have done a little layout diagram that you can all follow, that you can see where each of the star blocks have gone and where each of the spacer bars are. So I put a spacer bar underneath here to separate it out from the row below. So I needed to compensate and add spacers in here. So these are the additional spacer blocks for there, and one there and one there. And then that's our row 3. Row 4 is a fairly straightforward one again, and that's just got our 6-inch stars. Then we've got one spacer row here next to our 8-inch block, and then we've just got one of our other 6-inch stars where we've added the spacer blocks already to it to make it to the 8-inch, and that's our row 4. So the final row, row 5, I needed to add in the 12-inch block, and because I was working in derivatives of 8, the simple thing to do with that one is to add 2.5-inch squares all the way around it, and then that turns that into a 16-inch block, which then we can just put 4 of our star blocks together with that, and that makes one whole row. And then the only other thing I needed to do so that it had the same amount of squares as the other rows is put one spacer row of 2.5-inch squares here. And then that all of those, so the large 12-inch, 2 8-inch and 2 6-inch, and this is the 6-inch where we've inverted where the 2.5-inch squares are so that it separates everything out. And then we sew all of those together. So I made those 4 as a unit, made that as a unit, added the spacer blocks to, I think I added it to this block, and then just sewed the whole thing together. So it actually comes together quite easily if you treat it as rows and if you follow the layout diagram. But once you've turned them into 8-inch blocks, these 6-inch stars, it comes together really quite well. So then just one final thing with the borders. I added a 2.5-inch, that's 2.5-inch cuts, that will finish at 2.5, just a plain white here, just to sort of make the stars float a little bit. And then I cut a 5.5-inch strip for the outside border. And I decided we auditioned quite a few different fabrics to go with this, and some of them I picked out actually from this range. But in the end, because there's quite a lot going on in the centre of the quilt, we decided on just a plain. So this is a Moda Bella Solid, just in this very soft pink. And I chose the pink particularly because when I looked at this, it was the pink that was coming out more than any of the other colours in the quilt, and I wanted to draw more of that forward with the choice of the border. And I will say I quite often do that with borders. I don't always choose my border fabric until after the centre of the quilt is made. And then I look at it and see what is the colour, which colour do I want to pull from the centre of the quilt out into the border. So that's just a little trick. And I had several pairs of eyes here in the shop actually. We were auditioning different fabrics And in the end, we all decided that the pink was the nice one to use. So the centre of the quilt ended up being about 34 by 52 inches. So I got 1.5 metres of both of the border fabrics because I didn't want any joins in my borders. So I could cut, so basically it was 60 inches, so I could cut my borders parallel to the selvage. So instead of going from selvage to selvage across the fabrics, I came down the length of the fabric. So I've got plenty of the white left, but that's always a useful one to have in your stash for other backgrounds. And I've got enough of the pink left now also to do the binding. So it was 1.5 metres of both of those. The quilt itself, sorry, I should just say, the quilt itself, it ended up being about 46 by 64 inches. Now that's just the quilt top, so by the time I quilt it, that might shrink down a little bit. But as it stands, that's roughly the size of the quilt. So that will be my next job now, is to get that all layered up. I've got the backing fabric we've chosen out from there, and it's actually one of these, I think it's the one with the balloons in, that's going to go on the back. So I need to get that layered up and quilted, and then that will be our different star blocks from the soiree fabric for the children's quilt all done and finished. So I'm really pleased and really happy with how that's come out. So thank you ever so much for joining me in the mystery quilt, which was a mystery to me. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll give some of the star blocks a go. Have a look at the layout. We're going to attach the layout as a free download, so anybody that wants to have a go at this, you absolutely can. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me again here next time in the sewing studio.